who is the author of the book, Well-Gardened Mind, which you see here, and which you already see on some of the tables. The book has been translated into Latvian, and we'll be having a presentation of the Latvian translation of Sue's book shortly after the lecture. But please, Sue, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored and excited to be here today because it's just such an amazing thing seeing the book come out in the Latvian language. So I'm going to talk through some of the important themes in my book, some of the main themes. But obviously, if you want to know more, you're going to need to read the whole thing. But I'll give you an overview, and I know some of you have already read it in English. So I'll mention a few things that are not in the book as well. This book really draws on both aspects of my life, my professional life as a psychiatrist and psychotherapist, and also my gardening life, which really came about way back when I married my husband, Tom Stuart-Smith, who has, over the course of our marriage and his career become really quite a celebrated garden designer. And together we had this extraordinary opportunity to start making a garden around our home in our late 20s, early 30s. So we've been gardening the same patch of land, really from scratch, actually. It was an arable field before. So this book brings together all sorts of different ingredients that kind of interest me. I studied English literature before I studied medicine. So there's quite a few examples from literature. For instance, it's not very well known that the poet Wordsworth, he was not only, the great nature poet, but he was also a gardener, and he loved spending time in the garden as well. And it's also a book that includes quite a lot of psychology and neuroscience, as well as some of the personal stories of people who I interviewed during my research on visits to projects all around the world, really. And the other thing I did in the course of this book was really to sort of dig deep into my own experiences in the garden. So there's some of my own thoughts and feelings there as well. One of the themes of the book is the idea of a parallel process that can take place, that as we're working in the garden, caring for plants, tending a plot, that something else is going on, that somehow unconsciously the mind may be sorting out problems, worries, stresses, anxieties, and so on, and that through this activity, somehow the mind gets gardened too. And I feel this is such a strong message at the moment because not only are levels of mental illnesses increasing all around the world, really, we're seeing rising levels of anxiety, depression, stress, and burnout, and so on, but that we live in an age where the dominant metaphor for the brain is the computer, has become the computer. And, I looked at quite a lot of popular neuroscience books to sort of understand this more, and I could see it was, for the authors, it's a way of trying to explain, because people understand the sort of hardware, software idea and what an app is and things like this, but it's being applied to the brain as a way of trying to make it accessible. But with that comes a terrible sort of even greater sort of denaturalization of us, and we live in a time when many people are very disconnected from nature. But if we start thinking of ourselves as machines, I think we really are rather lost, actually. So the book is partly about reconnecting with ourselves as an element of the natural world. And I think what I'm going to do is just start with the very beginnings of gardening. So here we have my seeds in my greenhouse. taken in the spring, obviously. And this is really what hooked me personally into gardening, was the magical transformation that happens when you sow a few seeds and you water them, you care for them, you keep an eye on them. But most of what's happening is not really to do with you. You're just providing the environment in which everything that's locked in that seed will unfold. One of the things we saw all around the Northern Hemisphere at the beginning of the pandemic was, I think, a renewal of interest in gardens, and particularly a rush on seeds, buying seeds, and certainly in the UK and parts of the US, garden centres ran out of certain kinds of seeds. And I think it's worth reflecting on what was happening there. This was a time when we were all plunged into great uncertainty and fear and anxiety. Anything that we'd been looking forward to was cancelled, indefinitely postponed, whether that was a wedding, a family celebration, a holiday, it didn't matter what it was. And gardening gave people a very simple way to have something to look forward to at a time when there wasn't much else that you could look forward to. And this is a very, very central and powerful effect of how gardening can help people. When someone is suffering from a mental illness like depression or severe anxiety, or recovering from a trauma, for example, thinking about the future is very problematic. It can feel very frightening. It can feel foreclosed in a way, as if there is no future. And there can be a lot of preoccupation with the past. So gardening can offer a very simple way of just easing yourself into the habit of making future plans, having something to look forward to. And once you have that brings with it all sorts of other things like a sense of purpose, a sense of motivation. And this, of course, can kickstart the whole recovery for someone in terms of just that simple mental shift, really. And you know, we can't underestimate how important the ability to look forward is to our mental health. It's one of the things that marks us out as a species is that we're very, very good at anticipation. And we really struggle when we lose that ability. The other aspect of gardening, which I think is very helpful and is fundamental, is that you can't keep procrastinating. You know, we all do this, don't we? We keep putting things off, and we live in a time when, by and large, you can do most things, or a lot of things, at any time of day, any season of the year. And so we can just go on putting things off. The garden simply won't let you do that. It pulls you into the seasonal calendar. You have to work within nature's time frame. That gives us a structure, and that can be enormously helpful for anyone. You know, if your life feels a bit adrift, you've lost your mojo, it's hard to get going. If you can just get going with a few things in the garden, don't take on too much either, because that then becomes a stress in itself, but just a few things, something that you need to care for, it will hopefully just begin to pull you into a relationship. And I'm going to show you where some of those seeds were destined for. So this is our vegetable garden at home. There are some vegetables in there. It's mainly flowers, as you can see. It's not really, it's a very productive garden. But there are an awful lot of annual, mainly self-seeded flowers, which I first sowed probably 25 years ago. The poppies, the eschscholtzia, the verbena, and so on. And I rather celebrate the way they come back, and it's nothing to do with me anymore. And I leave as many as I can, unless they're really, really taking over. Of course, this is very important for attracting the pollinators. So we should all be doing this a lot more. You know, planting flowers that bring in the insects. But also, for me, it's about a kind of relationship that can happen in the garden. You know, in former times, looking back in history, gardening was all about domination of nature, control of nature. If you look back to the classic French formal garden, for example, that's the most extreme example of that model. But you know, that we can no longer live like this. We have to get into a relationship where we are working with nature, where we are supporting nature. And I think this to and fro that can happen in the garden, where the gardener does a little bit, makes an intervention, and then we stop and we wait and we see what happens. We see what's thriving, what isn't. You know, we deal with the necessary weeds. I think a lot of weeds can be left unless they're about to set seed, because the more ground cover you have, the better for the soil. And there's a kind of dialogue. I came to feel it's like a little bit of it's a silent conversation. Obviously, it's very delayed, but it's like, you know, something happens in the garden, the gardener responds to that and then does something else, and then you wait to see what's going to happen next. We're just one player in the garden, one of many, many different organisms and inhabitants of a garden. So I see gardening as a coming together of human creative energy on the one hand and nature's creative energy on the other. And I think this is one of the things that gives it the potential for it to be a very powerful intervention. Because in a lot of other creative therapeutic activities, the onus is on us, really, to the person, you know, whether it's art, music. You know, these are can be very powerful interventions, but the onus is on us to do all the creating. In the garden, we've already got so much going for us. It's just about how we respond to it and the kind of environment that we provide to unlock that creative energy. And then we can look at the results of our efforts and feel, whoa, we've actually done something really beautiful or really good. You know, the boost to your self-esteem that you can get through gardening, when really most of what you've done is just let this thing unfold, is enormous, I think. I don't think there's anything else that can give you quite that sense of reward in the same way. And of course, gardening can be hard work. And I think, you know, I occasionally get cornered by people at the end of a talk saying, oh, but my garden causes me so much stress. It's, you know, and I'm always battling with this and battling with that. And I think the answer is just be realistic about how much time you've got and you know, better to do something very small and grow things that you love. Don't grow things that you feel you ought to be growing. You know, the key thing is a kind of match between the gardener and the garden. Now I'm going to introduce my grandfather, who was called Ted May, because he was one of the inspirations behind the writing of my book. And I grew up as a child hearing his story from my mother. So Ted, who's pictured here in his 60s in his greenhouse with the orchids that he loved growing, had suffered enormously as a very young man during the First World War. He was captured in Turkey. He was captured from a submarine. He was a wireless operator, and he spent really most of the First World War from the spring of 1915 right till after the end as a prisoner of war. In a series of what clearly were very brutal labor camps. He was very lucky to survive. Many of the crew who were captured with him and the other prisoners in Turkey didn't make it home. I think only about 30% did. But he was very, very malnourished and very traumatized. And my grandmother had waited for him. They weren't married at that point. And she really nursed him. I mean, he was very emaciated, and the Royal Naval doctors predicted that he probably wouldn't survive because he was so malnourished. So she nursed him very carefully, feeding him tiny, like drip feed of soup, like once an hour, a little bit of soup. And he recovered quite a bit of his strength, but he was still really not functioning properly. And it was only when he got the chance to take part in a year-long course of horticultural rehabilitation that he really regained his life, and you know, acquired a lifelong love of gardening. Quite soon after that, he and my grandmother bought a small holding, and that's where my mother grew up. And I remember visiting as a child. Ted died when I was 12, and you know, he had an orchard, and he kept bees, and he grew vegetables and lots of flowers, as well as his exotic plants. You know, in many ways, the end of the First World War really marks the beginning of horticultural therapy, because there was such a huge amount of trauma to be dealt with. And many men returning from the front experienced a real desire to get out of the cities, to reconnect with the land, to have the peacefulness that you can experience in nature. This is an important phenomenon. Damien talked about biophilia earlier. The socio-ecologist Keith Tidball in America has coined a term, urgent biophilia. And urgent biophilia is what happens and what's seen time and time again following natural disasters, following conflicts, and actually during wars as well, where it's possible, that people experience an almost instinctive need to plant trees, to sow seeds, just really to reconnect and I think draw power and draw hope from nature's capacity for regeneration. And I'm going to give you one example here of wartime gardening. So this is an image from the Imperial War Museum archive in London. It was taken in the spring of 1915. It's the back wall of a trench right on the front lines on the Western Front. This soldier was called Captain Irving, and he was killed 3 months later. These men were really thrown into an appalling landscape of industrialized warfare that had never been seen before at that point, of terrible levels of death and destruction, and enormous fear, I think, that they had to deal with, and trying not to despair. And what happened is that the soldiers wrote home and asked relatives to send them packets of seed, which they did. And it was a spontaneous sort of action, really, that you know, dotted around the front lines were these little gardens on the back walls of the trenches. And it's clear from the soldiers' letters, some of which I quote from in the book, that these little gardens, these little pockets of beauty, they were growing flowers. They were growing flowers, cottage garden flowers, flowers they were familiar with from home, quick germinating annuals, very easy, nasturtiums, pinks, simple flowers like that, morning glory. That this was a psychological lifeline, really, and helped them hold on to an alternative reality. You know, everything that was associated with home, with love, with safety, with beauty, that it gave them a tangible way of reconnecting with that. This phenomenon happened on both sides of the line. The German soldiers, again, spontaneously did something very similar. And I'll just show you one more slide from this period of history. This is later in the war. It's a a soldier from the Gordon Highlanders. You can see his kilt. It's taken in October 1917 at Heninel. And what I really love about this slide is the sense of calm and focus and care, on this man's face and in his whole posture. And I think, one of the things that's very important about when you enter into a relationship of care with something is to understand that we are, through evolution really, our brains are actually primed to make care a rewarding activity. Now, we live in an age where care is often seen as a demeaning activity or a kind of why bother? We live in an age of replace rather than repair with materialism and consumerism. We shouldn't underestimate how much care can be intrinsic to supporting someone's mental health, both for the person cared for and the carer. Of course, if care is very, very demanding, it becomes onerous, and it's the opposite. But the reason care is replenishing and nurture is replenishing, and this is, otherwise, as a species, we wouldn't be hooked into caring for our children, is that it's associated with release of endorphins in the brain, our natural opioids. So the care system is very much part of the endorphin system. And with that, of course, comes a sense of pleasure, reward, relaxation, a little bit of a mood boost. There's also oxytocin release, which is a hormone associated with bonding. And oxytocin, very importantly, has an effect on the amygdala in the brain, which is the fear center of the brain. And it helps to damp down the stress response, the human stress response. So there are many, many reasons why, in this situation, simply engaging in small acts of care when you're in the midst of the most appalling, destructive situation, and having to also be an active participant in it. Why actually small acts of care could be such an enormous release and relief. Now I'm gonna move on to talking about a few examples from the book. And this is an example of a therapeutic garden based in Oxfordshire in the UK. It's called Bridewell Organic Garden. It's a long-running mental health project. It's been going for over 20 years. And it typically helps people with severe mental illnesses who have maybe been in and out of hospital. And they attend here sometimes 3 mornings a week, 4 mornings a week, or afternoons a week, and they come for about 2 years. That's the sort of average length of program. And what I really wanted to focus on here is the physical structure of this garden. It's, as you can see, it's a walled garden. It's in England, we have a lot of walled gardens, country houses. Typically, every country house didn't have to be large size, even medium size would have a vegetable plot inside a wall. And these spaces make really wonderful therapeutic gardens, and thrive, certainly, make the most of their walled gardens as well. A garden is by definition an enclosed space. It's a space that's set apart. So it doesn't have to have a wall around it, but it needs to have this feeling of safe enclosure. And that sense of safety is really fundamental to helping people, I think, make that first shift into being able to use the therapeutic potential of a garden. Because until you feel safe, you can't really begin to open yourself up to new experiences. And this is particularly true of anyone recovering from post-traumatic stress, where one of the hallmarks of PTSD is hypervigilance. So the constant unconscious often scanning of the environment for possible threats. So a garden can be very good at helping people put their guard down, and then you've got all the soothing sounds of nature, the wind in the trees, the sense of light and so on, maybe some water as well. So that all adds to the effect. And the other aspect that's very important in the garden is the experience of a combination of prospect and refuge. So this is thought to be the sort of ideal balance that we need to feel comfortable in a setting. So a landscape where we have good sight lines. So in a garden, you can usually see down the paths, you can see where the entrance is, you can see the sky, you can look up at the trees. You don't feel hemmed in, you don't feel too entrapped in a garden. But at the same time, you have this sense of safety and refuge. So this combination of prospect and refuge is very important. The other thing I just want to comment on here is you can see different parts within the garden, distinctive areas. You've got the linear beds, the raised beds, the glass house, the fruit cages. These are all the working parts of the garden, where the activity of gardening happens. And then on the upper part of the slide, you can see some more formal parts, more private parts of the garden, where people can just go and simply be in nature, not to feel compelled to do anything, but just to take time to connect with their natural surroundings, very much as we were hearing about this morning with the forest therapy, that to connect through your senses, to take time to look at the light coming through the leaves, for instance, or to notice the smells that are around you in the garden. This combination of being on the one hand and doing on the other, I think is quite important in the therapeutics of gardening. And it's a pitfall for many gardeners. I know I had a phase like this myself when I was really first hooked into vegetable gardening. I would go out in the garden and I would be looking for tasks, and I would have a mental list that would seem to be getting ever longer of things I needed to be doing, and it became oppressive. And then one day I realized that I was actually showing somebody around our garden, and I realized that I was actually suddenly really looking at my garden and looking at it and enjoying it. And I think that's just something to watch out for, that that you keep that balance between the activity of doing on the one hand and the simple just allowing yourself to be in a very present way, a very grounded kind of way. This is, Damien also mentioned Alnarp this morning. I visited Alnarp in Sweden quite early on in my research. It's a very important project which has published quite a lot of research on the process of horticultural therapy, established by the landscape architect Patrick Gran, who I think has now retired. But I wanted to show this slide as an example of the importance of letting people just be in a garden. The program here is very different to Bridewell. It's a 12-week program. The initial program that was set up here over 15 years ago was for people recovering from stress and burnout, and many of whom had been off sick from work for 2 years or so. And what they found is that that people would arrive in the program and just start frantically doing jobs, trying to be good, trying to impress the horticultural therapists, and so they started saying, okay, for the first 2 weeks you do nothing. Your task is just to find somewhere where you can sit and kind of meditate in the garden, but reconnect with your body, reconnect with your senses. And you can see there's the hammock. There's also the large stone above the pond where sometimes people will sit cross-legged, and just learning to slow down, really. And that's very important, and we need to do that more and more. I think, you know, our social media and emails and all sorts of things that are kind of ask us to be accessible 24 hours of the day mean that sometimes it's very hard to find that time, to carve out that time, simply to have, to be alone in nature, really, and commune with nature in this very basic way. This project draws on the work of an American psychiatrist and psychoanalyst called Harold Searles. He died in the 1970s, and he was really very, I mean, for his time, he was way ahead of his time. He observed in the asylum where he worked how important the trees were to some of his patients, that they were forming a kind of relationship with the trees, and deriving a sense of companionship from the trees in the grounds. And this led on to him constructing a hierarchy of relating, with human relationships being the most complex. They're obviously the most important. We are a social species. They're fundamental to our well-being, but they also can overload us. And, you know, we are hunter-gatherers by origin. Our remote ancestors would have had a whole range of relationships with the natural world. And there's, you know, we've lost that. We don't quite even sometimes understand it as a relationship. You know, we see trees as objects very easily, for example. So his hierarchies had included stones. He felt stones, water, trees, plants, all of these, they make less demands on us. And very importantly, they also give us a different sense of time. And this can be very calming and very stabilizing. When I was researching and interviewing veterans, for example, many of them spoke spontaneously about how described the help they'd had from a tree or from trees, because the tree is a symbol of endurance. It's survived a long time. It will outlast us. It can provide a kind of anchor when you feel very unstable. And I felt for some of the men I was talking to, that it was like a way of reattaching to life. It felt something dependable, you know, that they'd been through experiences which had really, in some cases, yeah, they'd lost their trust in humans and in the human world, and this was a way back in. Now, I'm going to say a little bit about Sigmund Freud, because he features quite a lot in the book. It's not very well known that he was a great nature lover. He was passionate about flowers, and he was also a lover of gardens. He didn't do hands-on gardening, I don't think ever, but his daughter Anna, who went on to become, you know, a very famous and influential child psychoanalyst, was the hands-on gardener in the family. And I think it's her in the background, because I think they're looking and planning what to do in this flower bed, which is actually now the garden of the Freud Museum in London. And it's changed quite a lot since then. Things have grown up, but you can still visit it. And Freud spent the last year of his life there as a refugee from the Nazi regime in Germany. As a boy, Freud had roamed in the woods around Vienna, bringing back flower specimens, and he became something of an amateur botanist. And then in later life, as an adult, he would spend 2 or 3 months every summer, if he could, in the mountains, hiking, teaching his children to forage, recognize mushrooms, edible mushrooms, collecting wild strawberries, and so on. But in the last 16 years of his life, he suffered a lot of ill health. And it started when he developed a tumor in his mouth, which became a cancer in his jaw, and he had to have part of his jaw removed. And after that, he had many complications, operations, infections, and so on. And his doctors basically forbade him from traveling. So instead, he found solace in the garden. Now, he didn't have a garden. I don't know how many of you have been to the Freud Museum in Vienna, but I mean, the apartment there is in the center of the city. There's no garden. So he moved out of the city to the suburbs every summer from May to September. His patients would come and see him there. And his one criteria was that there had to be a large and beautiful garden, because he would walk around the garden at least once every day. And you know, he would really notice what was changing. And I think this is another aspect of what a garden can offer us. A garden is like a little world in miniature. You know, it's a sort of microcosm. And it's always changing. There's always something new happening. There'll be something dying, but there'll be something coming into flower or fruition. So the more you look in a garden, the more you see. And that's really what Freud was doing. And this is why gardens are so important in hospital settings, in care home settings, and actually for anybody who suddenly finds their life is, they're grounded through illness of some kind or through old age, that they can no longer get out into the world in the same way. A garden can provide an awful lot of sustenance. I'm just going to show you one more slide this is from the Freud Museum archive as well. This is Freud's garden bed, which he had constructed when he was living in Vienna for actually his favorite garden at Grinzing. And he managed to bring it with him when he escaped as a refugee. And it was re-erected in Hampstead in the garden there. And it just meant he could spend as much time in the garden as possible and look at the flowers that he loved so much. He not only rested in it, he received visitors in it, he read books in it, he wrote in it. I think he really lived outside as much as he could. And this kind of approach, I think, is sort of coming back into thinking about how gardens can be used in hospices, for example. Is that there's, when life is closing in on you, being inside in a small clinical environment, it isn't very helpful. Whereas if you can gaze at the sky and the trees, you can have a sense that, life is still going on around you. There's something, you can open yourself up to the world in a way that you simply can't if you're shut inside in a hospital ward. The other thing that's important in relation to the what I was saying earlier about the ever-changing aspect of a garden is that when it comes to facing the end of life or facing any kind of bereavement, many people do turn to the garden for solace, and some of that is to do with this combination that we experience in a garden of on the one hand, the transience of life, but alongside a sense of the continuity of life. So we feel the seasons will go on. There's a sense of what's being called symbolic survival that we can experience through a garden, which can be very consoling. Now, this is another slide from our vegetable garden at home. It's the delphiniums, and I particularly love these flowers and the depth of colour in that blue. They literally sometimes stop me in my tracks, and I just have to gaze into the flowers. What's happening? I mean, we all have those kind of moments when we just find ourselves stopping and staring at it might be a beautiful anemone or a peony or just something that kind of holds us for a moment. And it's as if the boundary of ourself and the world shifts a bit when we have that experience. We feel we're at one with the experience. And it's a temporary feeling, but it brings with it a sense of flourishing. And this is intrinsic to the experience of beauty, the profound effect that beauty can have on us. Beauty is, in fact, neurologically replenishing in the brain. I discovered the work of neuroscientists at University College in London who had done a series of very interesting experiments using brain scans. And he specializes in the neuroscience of aesthetics. He's called Semir Zeki. And he wanted really to see if there was a sort of signature to beauty. In other words, if you were experiencing beauty, beautiful music, beautiful art, beautiful nature, is there something that all these experiences have in common that, if you like, is the essence of beauty in terms of what is being activated in the brain? And he even included in one of his experiments a group of mathematicians who found mathematical formulae beautiful because he wanted an abstract form of beauty as well, just to get rid of any of the sensory stimulation. And what the team found was that there is indeed a signature for beauty. It activates the deep emotional centers in our brain in a way that's not dissimilar from romantic love. So beauty and love are closely connected. It's particularly activating the medial orbital frontal cortex and other networks involved in release of endorphins. So we're talking about the natural opioids again, but also our basic mood regulating neurotransmitter serotonin, as well as dopamine, which is motivating and energizing. So beauty is a form of nourishment. And I think a lot of what we can experience in a garden, and I'm talking about a particular kind of garden, a sort of more of a flower garden, but of course trees play a large part in this too, is a kind of concentrated dose of beauty. Which I think can it's as I said, it's a transient effect, but it leaves a mark. Through the shift in neurochemistry, through the sense of calmness that comes with it. It lingers after. It lingers after you've left. A very compelling example of the need for beauty can be illustrated through the work of a charity called Lemon Tree Trust, which is based in the US, but builds gardens in centers for refugees, mainly in Kurdistan, in that part of the world. When they first set up this project, probably about 10 years ago now, they were really surprised because there was a desperate need for food in the refugee camps, but they were so surprised that what 70% of what the refugees wanted to grow were flowers. They wanted beauty. They had no other source of beauty around them, the 30% was for food. That was enough. But what they really needed was that transformative effect of beauty. Now, I'm going to mention Donald Winnicott briefly. He plays quite an important part in my book as well as Freud. Winnicott died in the 1970s. He was very influential in developing the understanding of the mother-infant relationship, and also the importance of play in childhood, and the necessity as adults that we have opportunities for play and creativity. This is something intrinsic to mental health. He felt that we all need at times respite from the demands of reality. And he spoke about this in terms of transitional space. It was a notional space. It's like a space that we can enter where we can inhabit a realm that's part fantasy, part reality. And it provides us with a resting place. And I think gardens intrinsically offer that. You know, if you're wandering in a garden, just sitting in a garden, you very easily slip into a state of reverie or daydreaming. You know, they take us into a different world, take us out of ourselves. But a garden is also, very importantly, a physical transitional space. It's, I think of it as an in-between space. The domestic garden, for example, sits between the home on the one hand and the outdoor world, whether that's the countryside or the city. The garden sits in between. And this is also very true in the hospital setting. And I'm going to say a little bit here about Horatio's. So this is the first of the Horatio's gardens. Damien referred to Cleve West, who designed this garden. This charity's gone on and made 7 other gardens, one of which was designed by my husband, Tom, at the National Orthopaedic Centre in Stanmore. This was the very first garden, and it really has, this charity has done so much to bring attention to the relevance of gardens in hospitals. Over the last half century or more, most hospitals in the UK dug up their gardens and put tarmac down and used them for car parks, or to build on, to expand on. Victorian hospitals all had gardens. All the early mental asylums all had gardens, but we lost that. It was very much part of our tradition. So the work of this charity, which works with patients recovering from spinal injuries, and they're in hospital for 6 to 9 months. This is not an easy. It's a devastating injury. It takes a long time to recover from, and there's a great deal of psychological trauma as well as physical trauma. And until this garden was created, there was no outdoor space. People were really contained within the ward, in quite a crowded ward. And the only outdoor space was if somebody was willing to wheel them down to the car park. And it was actually Olivia Chappell and David Chappell who run the charity. It was their son, Horatio, who did some work experience on this unit in Salisbury. He was horrified. He was age 17, and he just thought, this isn't right. He loved nature. He was a great outdoors person. And he really set this in motion and was then tragically killed. But his parents have continued. And it's been a very... It's very important in the whole, I think, ethos of gardening and health in the UK, the work of this charity. And I'll show you one more slide here so you can see, here it's a bit like going back to the days of Florence Nightingale when patients would be wheeled outside on their hospital beds. This kind of practice is happening again. These gardens for the spinal injuries units have to be very specifically designed. The paths are all very, there's no thresholds, there's no bumps, because actually somebody with this kind of injury cannot be joggled around. It can induce terrible muscle spasms. So they're very carefully designed. But what they have in common with I think other therapeutic gardens is the need for maximal seasonal diversity and change, so that there is always something different to see, something new going on. And I know from interviewing patients on this unit that many of them felt it not only helped them as individuals, but it also helped their relationships with their family and with their friends, because this was a nice place for people to come and visit. And also it gave them all something to talk about, to sort of notice things and chat about what was going on in the garden. And that's all part of the shared pleasure of gardens, which is so fundamental. I'll say a little bit about prison gardening, because actually the visit to this project here, which is in New York on Rikers Island, in the jail there, really made a big impact on me. It's a project run by the Horticultural Society of New York, and I was very, very struck talking to some of the men and women there, how quickly gardening helped them feel they'd done something worthwhile. Many of these offenders were people who really they'd been in and out of jail repeatedly, and they just wanted to break that pattern, but they didn't know how, and they'd often fallen out of education. They'd never been told they'd done anything worthwhile or good, nothing to feel proud of in their lives. And, growing a squash plant and harvesting it and then sharing it, making soup. These are very basic things, but very tangible results of your work, which you can experience and feel proud of. And that effect is not to be underestimated either. I'm also going to show you a slide from another prison project in the US. This is San Quentin prison in San Francisco in California. This is the Insight Gardening Project, which now runs prison gardening initiatives in 8 different prisons across California, because it's been very successful. At the time, it was really controversial that there was a rose garden here. It was like, why should prisoners have access to beauty? It was like, that was really thought to be like, why should they? Outrage. And yet, talking to Beth Waitkus, who runs this, set up the charity and runs the project, what they find is that learning to care for nature, learning to value nature, which beauty helps you do, you want to protect it, really helps people make a shift towards thinking about, caring for others, what it means to take care and to value life. This project and the Rikers Island project, I'll just show you one more slide. This is the vegetable planting. You see, it's quite a small area that they're functioning in, but you don't have to have a large area to have a big impact. This project and the Rikers Island project have very impressive effects on reoffending, and that's, I think, largely down to the fact that they have internships, which can be which offenders can go on to and work in the community, and often through greening up, community areas, often quite deprived areas of the city, and so on. So in effect, it's a kind of they're social justice projects. But just to give you the figures, the reoffending rate for prisons in the US, and it's pretty similar in the UK actually, is that people who, when they leave prison, 60% of them will be back inside within 3 years. But for these 2 projects, that reoffending rate goes right down to 10 to 15%. So this is a very significant transformation. Really changes people's lives. I'm going to end by talking about a couple of community projects, because I think gardening at this time, that we live in at the moment, there's been a lot of breakdown of community and a real growth in the number of people feeling isolated and suffering from loneliness. And gardening can do an awful lot to counteract that. This is a project in New York, which is run by the New York Botanical Garden and the International Rescue Committee. It's called the New Roots Project, and it helps refugees put down roots. So it's it's a place, I'll show you, this was it being created in 2013. This is what it looked like more recently. And again, you can see it's been carved out of a corner and surrounded by highways. But actually, you walk through those gates and you're in a different world. You're in a protected space. It's open to the outside world. There's a little market where the rest of the community can come in and buy produce. People in this garden speak many, many different languages, but the shared language is plants. And one of the things that gardens facilitate is human connection. And I think there are many different levels on which this is working, but it's an effect that's been called gardening as a social bridge. And that's a term I really like. I think it really captures what's happening. Somehow within a garden, it may be the sense of safety, it's shared tasks, shared pleasures. Food connects people as well, growing food, sharing food. People let down their guard. There's research showing that being in a natural setting, being around plants, shifts people towards being more empathetic to others, being a bit more generous. And one of the things we also know from the research about the impact of community gardens and urban parks is that it increases neighborliness. People are more likely to get to know their neighbors if there's green space around them. This is a youth project, and I think this is in Chicago. It's called the Windy City Youth Harvest Project. It's run by the Chicago Botanic Garden, and it works with at-risk kids who are in danger really of dropping out of school, getting into trouble, and so on. And some of them are already kind of on the edge of that. And they attend here during the summer vacation and after school between May and October. And they do a lot of group activities, a lot of play actually. They have a lot of fun in the garden as well. I had a great deal of fun when I visited. So they play games, but they also garden. They grow produce that they sell in the market, and the young people, they see the fruits of their work, and they're on the stall in the market. But actually getting this project going and getting young people into this project, there are a number of hurdles. First of which is financial. So the Botanic Garden actually pays them a small amount of money to attend the project. The other is, we've talked about biophilia, is biophobia. So for many of these young people, the idea of dirt and putting your hands in the dirt is really terrifying. They don't want to do it. They know very little about plants. They suffer from plant blindness, if you like. They don't recognize basic differences between plants because they've had so little exposure to the natural world. So this is a very gradual process, and the project really encourages people to attend for 2 years if they can. And what the results show is that many more of the young people who come through this project stay on in higher education. It helps shift them onto a different trajectory. That's the best you can hope for. Most of them aren't going to become gardeners or horticulturalists. It's not about that. But it's about, I think to some extent, providing an environment where all sorts of new learning about life, learning about people, it can take place in this very safe, protected setting. It's in this part of South Chicago is a place where there's a lot of gun crime. This is difficult place to live, and the garden provides them with a bit of sanctuary. And just right at the end, I'm going to just say a little bit about the project I'm developing at home in our garden at Surge Hill with my husband, Tom, and actually our son, Benjamin, who's an architect. He designed the building that you can see there in the middle. This is a CGI image. The building's very nearly finished. the floor is going down as we speak. And we're working with a Hertfordshire-based mental health therapeutic project called Sunnyside Rural Trust. This provides horticultural experience and training for adults with learning disabilities. And they've got 3 other bases in Hertfordshire, one of which is more like a small farm. This project is going to be, it's a very small nursery. It will be about propagating perennials. Because within, you can see in front of the building, there are 2 distinct areas. On the left of the screen is the vegetable growing area, where we've formed some very small community allotment plots for people living in walking distance who don't have a garden, who want to grow veg. And then the rest of the garden is something that Tom and his design team have established, which is called a plant library. And this is the plant library. You can see it there, taken earlier this summer. It contains about 1,500 different herbaceous perennials, all set out in metre square grids. So it really is a library. It's a tremendous learning resource for designers and horticulturalists. But because of the variety within it, it's also very therapeutic. When we have groups of school children coming as well, they get a real sense of adventure and exploration because it's set out on a grid and you can sort of zigzag around the paths. And I'm just going to show you one last picture of it, which is, this is the community vegetable growing area. And then we have a wonderful team of volunteers who help us look after the plant library. And you can see that in action here, overseen by Millie Suter, who's on the left, who is part of Tom's design team and looks after the plant library. So this is a very exciting new venture for us and really kind of brings together, I think, everything that I've learned through writing my book. And for Tom, it's also a new venture in terms of a lot of learning about plants and different kinds of plants, but it's bringing together our 2 areas of expertise in a way that's really, really, really nice, and I think we're both very excited by it. And I'm just going to give you the end on there.
Thank you, Sue, for a wonderful talk and a wonderful book. And we have time for questions, actually, and I will use my position to ask the first one. So I'm a child psychiatrist, and I'm actually very interested in, well, you've looked through the evidence and you've seen a lot of different projects. Maybe you can make a little bit more of a comment on how this practice can be used in what kind of groups in terms of this population, children, adults?
Of children?
Yes.
Well, I think gardening can help people across the lifespan, but I think for children, I see it as crucial, and it's one of the things we're going to use our building for in this project is we'll run a mixture of income-generating talks and workshops and events and trainings, but also open it up to local schools to come and either give children a day out or even teach. There's so many things you can teach through the garden. And in the UK, climate change is on the national curriculum. And I sort of feel really if you're going to learn about biodiversity loss and climate change, it's best to learn about it in a garden, because if you're learning about it in abstract, on a blackboard, on a board, it's just going to be very, very depressing. And you're going to feel like, well, I can't do anything about this anyway. But if you learn about it in a garden, exactly, there's a sense actually there are things we can intervene and we can do, to support nature. We can't do so much about temperature rises, but there's an awful lot that we can do. So I think that aspect is very important for children, understanding nature, understanding how much we can intervene in a good way, that not everything that humans do to the natural world, it has to be destructive and damaging. And that level of hopelessness, eco-anxiety, whatever you want to call it, is a growing problem, actually, for young people growing up today. Worry about climate change, I think, in the future, the feeling of what's the future going to be. So I think gardening, I would say that's across all ages of children, and whether they're struggling with their mental health yet or not, I think that's really, really important. We also do work with one of our little allotment plots was tended last year by our local youth counselling charity. And that was very, very interesting, seeing the young people when they came and what it was. Many of them get out into nature very, very little. And the excitement of all the flowers in the plant library, for example, was really, really wonderful to see, actually. And it wasn't what we'd envisaged, that they would be growing vegetables, which they did do. But actually what they were really excited by was the variety and the beauty in the natural world. And sometimes when we've had school groups, in terms of, bridging the gap between technology and, social media and so on, and devices and nature, the teachers will ask them each person to find one thing, not to take lots of photos, but find one thing they feel is really special for them and take a photo of it. And at the end, they all share. And it just gets them, they're not feeling deprived of this because they're being asked to use it, but they're not using it all the time. They're only allowed to take one image. So they really look to find their special thing. So I think there are various ways that you can work with children. And I think, I think teenagers, it can be very, very hard work working with teenagers and engaging teenagers. That project really has worked out how to do it, but they do make it fun, and they do a lot of what they call ice-breaking activities, in the group. And also, they always have a meal once a week made from the garden. And again, that's, I think, so important, because many of these kids aren't eating very well at home. Some of them are actually going hungry. But still, that sense of communal sharing of food, it becomes a kind of surrogate family, I think, for some of the young people, which is very stabilizing. There are different ways you can establish that. But it is hard work to get there. And I came away with so much respect for the horticultural therapists running that project and others like it, because it's not easy. It doesn't just all fall into place. You don't just put people in a garden and it happens. There's a lot of...
Especially adolescents.
Especially adolescents, yeah.
Thank you. Questions? We'll start.
Thank you very much, Sue, for really inspiring. Yeah, this idea is popping up immediately along your story. My question about botanical gardens. So I was surprised. So you mentioned 2 botanical gardens or 3. So is there some activities, as usual activities of botanical gardens or some botanical gardens are coming with an initiative to do that? How it is state initiated, or it is from the bottom up in botanical gardens from the people?
These 2 botanical gardens, there are others in the States. But these 2 are really remarkable in their commitment to community projects and mental health projects. Both of them, actually. New York Botanical Garden has a wonderful new learning centre, which is for schools, and also for people to train in urban farming. Chicago Botanic Garden has a big program. A lot of people go through it. So like some of those young people, if they really get the bug and they want to, this is like the entry-level scheme. There's a whole program that you can go on to where you could train to be, a master urban farmer if you wanted to, and make that your business and your life. So they've worked out the kind of the trajectory, if you like, of how to bring people in and then get the process of learning going. And along the way, you're helping people's mental health as well. And they both those gardens also do outreach mental health projects. It's not, the botanic gardens in the UK are often smaller. They don't have the large legacies. Some of these botanic gardens in the US have they're very wealthy. They have huge resources. And they've developed this over a long time. It's always been a big commitment. It's less so in the UK, but there are increasing, I think, interest in doing this and understanding that it's no good for a botanical garden just to sort of expect everyone to come to it, that there needs to be various levels of outreach and education projects going on. Many of the botanic gardens do have schools programs, for example. But the Royal Horticultural Society is also undergoing a big shift towards working with people with mental health problems and using therapeutic gardening. So they've recently created a very big new garden called Bridgewater, which Tom, my husband, did the master plan for. And it's on the outskirts of Manchester. It's a big project. It's got a wonderful sort of play area, woodland exploratory play area. It's got a therapeutic garden within a walled garden. And they are working with social prescribing, which Damien mentioned earlier there. That's quite a big shift for the RHS, which traditionally was very much a horticultural organisation, and I think it's the zeitgeist is changing all around the world. We're realising that actually this outreach work really, really matters and can have a big impact on communities and on people's lives.
Sveiki, man ir mikrofons, es tāpēc lūkšu tulku palīdzību. Mani sauc Laura. Pirmkārt, jāpaldies par tiešām iedvesmojošo lekciju. Un man pieredze un jautājums ir, es veidoju publisko dārzu un gribētu šo dārzu veidot ne tikai kā apskates dārzu, bet arī kā ar sociālo pievienoto vērtību. Un ļoti daudz dārza apmeklētāji, kad viņi atbrauc pie mums ciemos, tas dārzs ir liels, ar ļoti lielu teritoriju, ainavisku, un viņi saka, jums te vajag rīkot talkas. Un es arī viņiem piekrītu, un es šīs talkas cenšos rīkot, un tajās manās sajūtās ir, kad man liekas, kā ģimene no, pieņemsim, Purciema, taču var atbraukt, pakasīt lapas, tur padarīt kaut kādus dārza darbus, uzcert kopā ar bērniem marshmallows, un ka tas taču ir fantastiska pieredze, bet organizējot, tās atsaucības nav, tie ir tikai draugi, radi un daži dārza apmeklētāji, kas tiešām ko ir uzrunājusi, tad kāds ir jūsu ieteikums, kā liktei, caur ko to sabiedrību uzrunāt, lai viņi ieraudzītu to vērtību tajā visā? Kas ir tie atslēgas vārdi?
So I'll try to translate.
Very long question.
Yeah, it's part of a kind of an experience because the question is about kind of creating this public gardens, and one of the listeners, the question, she is creating a kind of a public garden space, and of course a lot of people kind of suggest that you have to kind of make some gatherings, talka, I don't know how to explain it, like a communal activities for different people, and she's trying to do that, and she doesn't see a lot of response, and the question was about how do you kind of make this going, this kind of involvement of the community. What is the key? Yeah, the key to involving the community.
Well, I think every community is different, so you've got to find out what it is that will bring your community into the garden. That might be I don't know, holding a music event in a garden. It might be doing something very, very different. It might be involving an artist. It might be, children's play. I think you've really got to think what it is that will. It could be food. It depends what your local community is and what their needs are. But I think doing things that are fun and engaging. I think a lot of people feel, gardening's not for them. They feel a bit maybe shut out of the garden, and I think you just have to keep on trying, and not feel despondent. And I don't know. I think it's it can be really hard. I think, but I think once it is. We're trying to change attitudes, aren't we, and change perceptions, and that's never easy. That process of change is never easy. For some people, like in the US, the thing that people get very excited by is food, because the food system there is so industrialized. You can't buy anything that's not been doused in pesticides and herbicides. And the food is often not very fresh, and it's all wrapped in plastic. So, that often brings people into community gardens, is the opportunity to buy fresh produce. But in other parts of the world, that's not such an issue, So you've got to find, what are people lacking in their lives? What are they going to feel, oh, this garden, what will they see it as a resource for, an opportunity? I don't know. I think family days. One thing that's proved really, really popular at Bridgewater that I mentioned earlier is doing family den building days. So getting families to come, and how way back when children were able to just play in the woods on their own, and they would build little camps and build little, little places, little hidey places. It's doing that, and they was just amazed how popular this activity was, because everybody, the imagination just takes off, and people think, oh, that sounds really fun, and they're not being given something manufactured to play with. They're going to have to make it. But again, that might not work in another part of the world. So I think it's about finding that, just finding what it is.
I think it's a very important idea that there is no such thing as a community. You have a lot of different communities, and you have to understand that.
Absolutely, yeah.
We have a question here.
Thank you very much for excellent, very nice, and very fulfilling. I have a lot of questions, and mostly maybe two. Okay, if one.
I will allow one.
Yeah. Okay. Second, I will ask later. But then it's not. There's no pretext. It's not joyful. Then you were telling that people going towards, older people going towards the end of the life, they need not to sleep in the hospital, but at least have feelings with how it is occurring in the how it is in UK. So if an older person, if medics are telling you need, or at least I am telling you need to make operation and do this, and the person tells, oh, I don't want. So what? I'm a psychiatrist too and psychotherapist.
So I think the question is about, do you see this shift in the understanding of the end of life, and then the importance of involving nature and horticulture in that part of...
Yeah, I think that is a growing trend. I think, like a lot of things, it varies around the country. I have a really good friend who works in an education, a new education project for end-of-life care called Living Well, Dying Well. And I don't know if you have something here called death doulas, but this is like someone who is trained to help people with the emotional side of dying, as well as the practical. Not that many of them work in healthcare already, but they want to get better at that side of it. And nature really is so fundamental to that. I don't think we do old age very well at all in the UK. There are an awful lot of care homes that have, very little access to nature, no plants inside and so on. One thing I quote in the book is Atwal Gawandi's description of the care home, which turned into a kind of naturalistic experiment, really, where, this is obviously in the US, where they introduced plants, they also opened up part of the garden, and they also had some animals like rabbits and so on. And the effect, they looked at levels of medication before and after, and they saw a real drop in the amount of medication people needed in order not to be agitated. People were just much less agitated, they were much calmer, they slept better. And it was a fairly simple, low-cost intervention. And I think, Damien mentioned those groundbreaking Ulrich experiments. Now, what's really shocking about those experiments, the hospital experiments, the post-surgery experiments, is that his first experiment was in 1987, I think. It was way back. And he was showing them people being discharged a day earlier. And you have to, what's been going on in the healthcare system that it's taken so long to understand that, that when we're nursing people in clinical environments that are very anxiety-inducing, in which they fundamentally experience a form of sensory deprivation because the walls are white, and and there's nothing to soften it. This is it's having a negative. It's working against the treatment. It's working against whatever the treatment is. So I think again that is beginning to shift, but it's not happening everywhere. So these things just take time. But I think the key thing is there is a bit more of an awareness. I even found, as a psychiatrist, when I started writing my book, in 2014, I very first started doing the research for the book. It took me over 5 years to write the book. If I was at a conference with colleagues, with psychiatric colleagues, and they would say, "What are you doing?" And I'd say, "Oh, I've got this commission to write this book about gardening and mental health." They'd kind of look at me like, "Oh, poor you, you're really going down a backwater." Oh. By the end, like the year before publication, when I was finishing it, I just really noticed a change. And this is in 5 years. I'd say, "Oh, yes, that's what I'm doing." And it's like, "Oh, that's really interesting, And then they'd start saying, "I referred somebody to a gardening project in the community recently, and he's done surprisingly well." It's like... So
surprisingly rapid.
Yes. So I think, gardening isn't a cure-all. It's not a magic cure, and it is hard work. It's hard work. The process of gardening is hard work. Setting up a project and running a project is also hard work. But, we have been missing a trick. And if you look back at previous healthcare, in history, healthcare systems in the second half of the 18th century and the 19th century and the early 20th century, they all had gardens, they all had greenhouses, they all had cut flowers on the ward. You read Sigmund Freud's letters when he was a junior neurologist in clinic. He would write to his fiancée, Martha, "Oh, I wish you could see the beautiful roses that are on my consulting table." We've come such a long way from that, of really stripping nature, seeing nature as an enemy, as something dirty that has to be kept out of the hospital.
Well, let's hope it's a spiral. And we're
Yeah, I think we are. I think it is changing, yeah.
The miliotherapy. So I'm looking at Ilze.
Vai mums vēl kāds jautājums? Pēdējais jautājums. Būs?
Well, if...
Labi. Okay, I guess that no more questions. Vai ir?
There's one
Okay. The last question.
The last one.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Christine, and my background is environmental science. Thank you again for your book, and especially about the line that you said that the people are alienating, the society is alienating from the nature, alienation.
And what is your opinion? More and more, or let's say better and better equipped nature trails, are they leading to alienation or more connection to nature, when we can just walk without rubber boots in the bog or very damp places, and especially those so-called eco houses in Finland, where you can live in glass box in the middle of the forest. So is it alienation or getting closer to nature? Thank you.
I think it's a question of degree, and I think that, you know, people have always needed protection from nature. You know, we have this idea of nature as this wonderful good thing, but, you know, we need protection from storms, we need protection from the weather, we need and you know, so what's the difference between the glass box and the hiking boots, as it were, or the wet weather gear? You know, we do need that sense of protection too. Living in the wilderness is a very, very tough thing to do, and you know, Carl Jung was very clear about this, actually. I do quote him in the book. You know, he said, "Oh, some people get addicted to wild nature, you know, and they use it like a drug." And that he felt what we needed was something that helped us mediate between the human and the natural. That's where we need to be focusing, rather than having these two, like, you know, two polar extremes. And that's that. He was a great believer in the allotment movement, in gardening and so on, but also in the need for nature in the cities. So he was writing about this in the 1960s. So he was way ahead of his time in many ways. But I don't think one should get too romantic about, you know, about media, you know, too sort of idealistic about unmediated nature. It's not for everybody. But I think what we need is for people to feel a sense of connection to the natural world, for it not to feel alien, to respect it, to value it, to understand where their food comes from, to understand that we are biological beings, that we do need daylight, that, you know, we do need, like plants, we do need periods of rest and recovery, that, you know, that we can't, like, again, you can't rush the growth of plants. We're the same. If we have to recover from something, it will take its time. You know, the synapses in the brain are then you can't speed that up, like you can't speed up the growth of a tree, as it were. So I think it's about that. I think it's about really creating lots and lots of little links to the natural world. And if that's through having forest trails, then that's fine, because I think certainly when people first experience the natural world, if they've never had any contact with it, they do need to feel a sense of some kind of safety, some existential safety. And they might move on from that, they might not. You know, and I think that's why gardens are so important for children as well, because that's the first experience, isn't it? A garden is a protected space where you can wander freely, you can play, you can muck about, you can get dirty, you know. Hopefully you won't be told off. But, you know, it's small steps, I think.
Okay, thank you so much, Sue. And let's give a round of applause. I think. And I think I give word to Ilse for some closing remarks.
Yes, thank you. So, Sue, I think you perfectly kind of wrapped up what every speaker has been talking about, what is a balance between the untamed and tamed nature, and how we live, and in which periods of life we need one or another, and how actually we can come together and become better people because of a connection with nature. That the nature is one of the connection factors. And I would like to first of all thank you, of course, all the speakers. So Damien, I think you're somewhere catching some fresh air. Yes, thank you, Damien. Thank you, Elena, Inga, and Sue.